Wait, if that was the Rune of Death, why am I still alive? You probably had the same exact thought the first time Maliketh killed you. Most of us assume the Rune of Death is simply the most powerful killing force in Elden Ring. But the more I looked at Maliketh, Godwyn, Ranni and the Tarnished, the less that explanation made sense. I think the Rune of Death doesn't exist in Elden Ring to kill everyone around. It exists to decide when death becomes permanent. Let me explain this idea and its background. The biggest mistake I think we make is treating the Rune of Death like it's just an overpowered weapon. That is understandable. Maliketh literally pulls death into his blade. Black flames consume everything they touch. His attacks permanently reduce your maximum health. Everything about the presentation screams one message: this is absolute death. But then reality immediately disagrees. He kills us and we come back. The Black Knife assassins wield fragments of Destined Death too, yet they don't erase every immortal they encounter. Godwyn dies, Ranni dies, except neither of them actually experienced a complete death. One loses a soul, the other one loses a body. And right away the rune stops behaving like a simple weapon. Instead it starts looking like something much stranger, almost like death itself has different parts. And that made me rethink one assumption I'd always carried about. Maybe the Rune of Death was never designed to kill. Maybe it was designed to decide what kind of death someone is allowed to experience. That is a very different idea. The event that changed my perspective wasn't Maliketh. It was a Night of Black Knives. Think about what actually happened. Ranni stole only a fragment of the Rune of Death, not the entire rune, just a piece. Yet somehow that single fragment produced one of the strangest events in From Software history. Godwyn's soul dies, but his body lives. Ranni's body dies and her soul survives. If death was simply an instant kill mechanic, none of that should be possible. Instead, one complete death becomes two incomplete ones. That suggests something fascinating. Death isn't binary, it's divisible. Body, soul, identity, perhaps even fate itself. The rune isn't applying one effect. It's governing multiple laws simultaneously. That's why I don't think Ranni simply weaponized death. I think she proved that the death itself can be separated into individual functions. Once I realized that, Maliketh suddenly looked very different. Because he isn't swinging death, he is wielding authority over one of reality's most fundamental laws. That brings us back to the Tarnished. Why are we different? At first I believed the simplest explanation. Grace just resurrects us. But this answer is not very elegant, don't you think? So I dive deeper. Everyone else in the lands between exists inside the Golden Order. We don't. We were stripped of grace, sent away, died outside the lands between, and then called back. That is not resurrection inside the system. That's being invited back into it. Every time the Tarnished dies, our body disappears. We awaken somewhere touched by grace. Not the air tree, not death, but grace. To me, that feels more like suspension. Almost as if death hasn't finished its work yet. The Rune of Death determines when the ending is truly final, and grace simply refuses to let our story reach that ending. At least not yet. That is an important distinction. We are not stronger than death, we are simply unfinished. And as long as Marika's purpose for the Tarnished remains incomplete, grace continues pulling us back. Not because we are immortal, but because our ending hasn't been permitted. And here we are, near the final puzzle solution. I've heard people describe Maliketh as a guardian of the incredibly dangerous weapon. I don't think that is what he is protecting. He is protecting reality itself. Think about what Marika actually did. She removed death from the Elden Ring. Not because death was evil, but because removing it fundamentally rewrote how the world functioned. Nobody reaches natural ending anymore. Souls entered endless cycles. The Air Tree became responsible for processes that death once governed naturally. The entire Golden Order became an unfinished equation. Maliketh wasn't guarding a sword. He was guarding the missing law that kept reality balanced. That is why everyone wants it. Ranni steals it, the Black Knife assassin depends on it. Death root spreads because its absence broke the natural order. Even our journey in Elden Ring eventually requires us to release Destined Death back into the world. Not because we suddenly need a stronger weapon, but because the Elden Ring world literally cannot move forward until death becomes part of reality again. That is an enormous difference. We are not retrieving a magical artifact, we are restoring one of the existence's original rules. The more I think about Elden Ring lore, the more I feel like the game tricks us with its own terminology. We hear Rune of Death, so naturally we focus on death. But almost every major event involving Destined Death is actually about endings. Godwyn's ending, Marika's order, the Erdtree endless cycle, the age we are trying to create, even Maliketh himself. Everything revolves around deciding which stories are finally allowed to conclude. That is why I think the Rune of Death doesn't simply kill, it authorizes endings. And that explains why so many things surrounding it feel contradictory at first. Sometimes a body dies, a soul dies, sometimes neither, sometimes grace intervenes, sometimes death root corrupts what should have ended naturally. Those are not random inconsistencies. They are different consequences of a world that has spent centuries trying to function without one of its fundamental laws. Which brings me back to the question that started all of this. Why doesn't Maliketh permanently kill us? Maybe that is the wrong question. Maybe the real question is this: has the Rune of Death even been trying to kill us at all? Because the more I look at the evidence, the more I think its true purpose was never to create death. It was to make sure every life, every god, every kingdom, and every age could eventually reach the ending it was always destined to have. And maybe that is the greatest irony of all Elden Ring. The most feared force in the lands between isn't death itself. It's the moment the world is finally forced to accept that one story, even the Golden Order, must come to an end. Thanks for watching, hit that like button and subscribe for more Elden Ring and other Souls-like games lore and guide videos, and stay sharp out there, Tarnished.